To our webinar. My name is Catherine Abreu. I'm the Executive Director at Climate Action Network Canada, and I'm calling in today from the unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe in what is also known as Ottawa. I would really love to encourage all of you. We have so many people on the line with us today to let us know where you're calling in from. It would be lovely if you feel comfortable for you to acknowledge the traditional Indigenous land that your community is on. If you're not comfortable writing that in the chat, that is, of course, totally understandable. And if you're just curious about where your community might be in terms of traditional Indigenous territory, I would really encourage you to check out nativeland.ca, which is an amazing map that helps us understand the histories and traditional territories across Turtle Island. So I would please like to give a warm welcome to our first in a series of webinars today in our Pathways to Zero webinars. Today we'll be talking about place-based policy ambition. So we're going to be hearing some incredible stories happening all across the country in communities right where you live. I'll give a few kind of housekeeping notes, and then I'll introduce what it is we are trying to accomplish with our Pathways to Zero webinars. And then I will hand it over to our incredible speakers and storytellers today. So first things first, you will notice that you have chat enabled, and we're seeing really amazing introductions to folks in the chat. Really encourage you to keep introducing yourselves. We're always so thrilled to keep this as a record of our time together. In the chat, you can also ask questions. So as speakers are speaking, Lauren and I will be collecting those questions, and we will attempt to pose those questions to our speakers. We will not, there are too many of us on the line for us to unmute you all so you can ask your questions directly. So please place your trust in your facilitators to do that. Also, if you have technical questions, you can enter those in the chat or in the Q&A, and someone else from the Climate Action Network Canada team will be there to help you out. Today's webinar is available in both French and English. We have our amazing translator, Marcel, with us. So most of you, all of you, hopefully will have the interpretation button available to you at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. You should be able to choose what language to hear the presenters in. So we do have some presenters who will be speaking in French. We have presenters who will be speaking in English. Just make sure that you're paying attention to that interpretation button and choosing the right language for you. So this is the first in our 9-week, 10-part Pathways to Zero webinar series. And when we first started talking about this webinar series a few months ago, it started off as something kind of relatively small, a short series of maybe 3 or 4 webinars to tell the stories of ground level action taking place across the CAN-Rac network. But very quickly, as we talked about it, we realized that if we're going to tell the story of our collective pathway to zero emissions, we need to be broadening the scope of that conversation beyond our 123 member organizations to include our allies. And we also realized that 4 weeks and 4 webinars certainly weren't going to cut it. So here we are with 10 webinars that will unfold over the course of the next 9 weeks. And what we are really hoping you can take away from these webinars is the knowledge that although there is so much work ahead on the road to a climate safe future, all of us who are committed to building resilient, prosperous communities are part of a vast, multifaceted movement that is already doing the good work and has been doing that work for years now. So we really want to inspire you with this series, but we also want to inform. We want to open up a space for us to learn together and from one another. Climate action isn't just about lobbying the government to give us the policy we need, although that is an essential element of the work, but it is critically about shaping and reshaping the communities that we live, organize, and work in to model and practice climate resiliency, whether that is by organizing mutual aid efforts within your community, learning how to better communicate climate realities beyond your particular bubble, or restoring a local watershed. So with this series, we are going to be bringing you the stories from experts, leaders, movements, and game changers, innovators, culture changers, and frontline champions who work every day to put us on the path towards decarbonization, while prioritizing abundance, well-being, dignity, and importantly, justice. I'll give you an overview of the series, but know that you can always check out our website, climateactionnetwork.ca, and you can visit our Pathways to Zero microsite to take a look at the full run of the show. But our conversations will be less sectoral and more thematic. So we're going to be exploring topics like Indigenous sovereignty and energy justice, cutting edge solutions, faith and complex systems change. So again, that full set schedule is at climateactionnetwork.ca/pathways to zero. You'll find details there on every week, all the speakers, all the registration links. And of course, we're also going to be recording each of these webinars and uploading links to those webinars. So you can check out the conversation and those videos will always be there for you. We will, over the course of the next number of weeks, also be taking some creative approaches to capturing the amazing information we're sharing in these webinars. So look forward to some cool images, infographics, and some summaries coming out. Finally, let me tell you about the conversation we're having today. Local communities, as we all know, of course, are at the forefront of climate ambition in Canada, as they are on the forefront of climate impacts. And so we thought there's no better place to start our series than right at home, wherever home might be for you. So today's chapter, Exploring Place-Based Policy Ambition, will examine some of the practical ways that community-based, civil society, and grassroots initiatives are locking in ambitious policy changes for municipalities, as well as Indigenous communities across the country. We'll be hearing 5 different stories from regions across Turtle Island, and then we'll be following it up with a Q&A period. I'll remind you that since this is a webinar, we will be taking those questions in the chat or in the Q&A box that you can find again at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Yes, and again, a reminder that we have interpretation available to us, so do remember to pick the language that you prefer to hear these presentations in toward the bottom of the screen. And now to our first speakers. So really so pleased to have with us Judy O'Leary from Climate Caucus and Anna Gonzalez from Youth Climate Lab to talk about their youth mobilization manual. Judy co-leads a chapter for Citizens Climate Lobby and is the co-founder of BC Climate Alliance. And Anna is the co-founder and managing director of Youth Climate Lab, where she leads the operations of the organization, developing and implementing resources needed to accelerate our impact by empowering youth in climate entrepreneurship and policy. Take it away, Anna and Judy.
Hi folks, just waiting for my slides to load. Hello and bonjour tout le monde. My name is Anna Gonzalez, as I was just briefly introduced, and yes, today we're going to be talking about our youth infiltration manual. But first things first, this is a tweet from Naomi Sayers that we'd like to use at the beginning to acknowledge the lands where we're in. So I'll just very briefly read it. If you're a non-Indigenous person and think land acknowledgements aren't enough, or you want to do something more better, start by describing your relationship to the land. Where did your family come from? How did you end up here? And what did you benefit, lose, gain, or loss? So with that, I wanted to say hello, introduce myself. I am currently in the state of Oaxaca in the southeast of Mexico, a country where I was born and raised. This is home to many Indigenous peoples, noted in my tiny screenshot over here, primarily Zapotecas, Mixtecas, and Mijes. And I am here, and my relationship to this is because when I left to move to Canada, where I have resided for the last 10 years, I was quite ignorant of my role and responsibility when it comes to my relationship with the land and with my ancestry. So yeah, I've been here for a couple of months, trying to respectfully and responsibly learn about my ancestry, about the land that I'm in, and about yeah, how we came to be here. A lot of my family came from Spain, France, and Japan. And benefited a lot from colonialism. So, and we continue to. So it's part of kind of my exercise, and I encourage all of you to reflect a bit on where you stand and what your responsibilities are, where you're from, and where you currently reside. And with that, I'll move to Judy for her acknowledgement using native language, Kat named at the beginning.
Thanks, Anna. I'm Judy O'Leary, and Network Coordinator is the hat I'm wearing today with Climate Caucus. And I'm calling in from the traditional and unceded territories of the Sinixt, Salix, and Ktunaxa people in interior BC, in what is also known as Nelson. And I'm so appreciative and grateful to live and work on those lands. And I'm here in a strange situation of that Climate Caucus has been totally remotely based since the beginning 2 years ago, and yet we are very place-based because we represent over 300 local elected leaders, councillors, mayors, and regional directors from every province and territory in Canada. So they represent their places very strongly. And the work that they're doing as climate-friendly councillors is to push to meet our Paris targets under Climate Caucus's mission of 1-10-0, one planet, 10 years left, and no one left behind. So we see those as equally important. We're not just about decarbonization, but we are based in these communities that we're working with. And on this slide here, you'll see the 3 roles that we play. The meeting place has been so important for our councillors. Often it's extremely lonely to be in that place of climate-friendly councillor, and you may be the only one on your council. So that emotional support, that connection with like-minded people has been great. We've heard so much appreciation for that. They've said it's made a world of difference to them continuing in their work to have that. Lever for action, we lobby at higher levels of government to get the resources, regulatory authority, and policies that municipalities need to play their role, which we believe can be huge in climate action, but it needs that support from higher levels of government. The hive mind, which I'll share later with you in the chat, we're developing resources that we share. So for example, if you're in Halifax and you have a great tree canopy bylaw, no one else needs to invent that. We can share that around. So we've been working really hard to build resources and share those. And part of that has been our work with Youth Climate Lab, which has been fantastic. I have to say, Anna and Youth Climate Lab has been such a great partner. We realized early on that councillors can't do their work if they don't have public support. And youth voices are so key in that. They really care about the place they're in. But what we were hearing from our members and some from youth climate advocates that many of us know personally is that it wasn't working very well. The youth climate advocates were struggling to figure out how to be effective. Our councillors were super busy, not always the best informed themselves. And so it was leading to frustration on all sides and not as much action as should have happened. And we were realizing that local government is extremely opaque, very complicated. And some of our members as newly electeds on a climate platform were also struggling to figure it out. So we decided we would create what Anna is going to present to you in a few minutes, the Youth Infiltration Manual. So what we did from the Climate Caucus side is we brought to this the experience of our elected leaders, where they had figured out who has the power, where are the most important, most effective intervention points, how does local government work, when should you actually protest really loudly, when does it make sense to turn up at that council meeting with your signs, and when does it make more sense to show a little bit of patience. How do you actually pitch an idea to council and get them to listen and then follow through and actually do the work? So basically, how do you get City Hall to listen without totally exhausting yourself in the process? And then because partnering with Youth Climate Lab, we're able to bring those youth voices to that as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Anna, who'll talk about this manual. And in the meantime, I will paste into the chat our website and also a link to the Councillor Handbook, which is there for you to use in any way you like. And if you have any things that you think should be contributed to that manual, I'll also put my email in there so you can say, hey, you missed this great thing. Thank you. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Judy. So very briefly, I'll talk about Youth Climate Lab because yeah, there's a little self-promotion here, but we're a youth lab dedicated to creative, innovative projects for climate action. And we essentially work in 3 shifts. The finance shift to disrupt capital flows and make them more equitable so that young people can start and scale their solutions. The skill shifts to build the capacity of young people to transform their communities. And then the policy shift, which is kind of where we're landing here today with the manual, where we aim to demystify, infiltrate, and co-create policy solutions. So again, this kind of leads to our shiny new, soon to be launched infiltration manual. It's coming out on January 26th. So this is a bit of a teaser. But yeah, this infiltration manual, Judy described a little bit about what it is, but I'll touch on the why. So I guess a lot of you, if you showed up to this webinar, understand the value of place-based action. Approximately 50% of emissions in Canada are controlled or within municipal control. We have local level policies, a lot of the spaces where a lot of us started. It's a very community-oriented, tangible results space where you can really see some of the impacts of your efforts. And I think that to a lot of us, myself included, brings us back to that level of action. It's where I personally get my energy from. Yeah, having been at COPs, having been at international policy level and different levels of intervention points, I think, to me personally, there's quite a draw from the local level, community-oriented action. And then, yeah, the other big why behind the infiltration manual was exactly what Judy said. These governance phases are complicated for all, let alone youth. A lot of the times made to seem a little bit more complicated than they actually are. So this was created to be a tool in a toolbox of options that young people can have to create climate solutions in their communities. Before I continue, this is a note that we have in our manual, and I do want to highlight here. The municipal system is rooted in colonialism and has historically and systematically excluded BIPOC voices, as well as created a number of different barriers of access to many other different folks, including but not limited to disabled folks, people in the LGBTQIA+ community, people without access to traditional education, English speaker, non-English speakers, etc. So I think it is important for us to recognize that this isn't always a space that feels safe for folks, and that is okay to recognize and to decide if this is not the avenue for you to engage in. As I said, there's a number of different avenues for local level action, but this is one that we wanted to hack. Very briefly, I'll touch on a bit of what the manual covers. It's a bit of a table of content here, but how municipal governments work, the who, the how, and the what behind municipalities. Then we have finding and mobilizing supporters. So really building your network and finding support systems and other folks that may support your efforts. Then we have taking it to council. So now that you may have access to council, how do you demystify that point? And who do you need to talk to? How do you get clear commitments? Essentially what happens when you are inside City Hall. And then the last section is knowing your worth. These are tips in self-care and youth representation that were, well, the whole manual was informed, as Judy mentioned, from the counselors at Climate Caucus, but also a youth steering committee. So a group of young folks that have successfully hacked the local governance structure from different avenues. And their input on top of kind of demystifying this whole process was really that last chapter that talks about how to hang in there for the long haul, self-care, balance, and really recognizing your worth in these spaces. So yeah, this is a little bit of what it covers. I think the big hope here is that by understanding how our systems work right now, we can advocate for ourselves and our communities and reimagine how we advance climate justice, something that Kat mentioned in the introduction, but really shaping and reshaping the way that our communities look like.
Anna, can I hop in for a second?
Please do.
We've had a couple of folks say that it is a little hard to understand you. Your voice is a little echoey. And so if you could slow down a little bit and maybe speak a bit closer to the mic. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I am in a room with some echo. I've been told that today, but working from home is challenging. Is this a little bit better? Kat, can you give me a thumbs up, maybe? Okay. I'm almost done too, and I'm pacing through this because I know we have limited time. But other place-based efforts that Youth Climate Lab has been engaging with is creating a similar demystifying tool or manual for territorial and federal policy, particularly for northern communities that we've been developing. and it kind of the structure and the framework around policy demystification and co-creation with intergenerational actors of new spaces to engage in policy. So we kind of try and take what we're learning from our communities, from the efforts that young people are already taking, and demystifying them and putting them into kind of short briefs that can make it easier for folks to access. With that, and maybe I'll open it up to Judy in case there's anything I missed, but if not, thank you. And here, yeah, keep an eye out for our manual coming out on January 26th on our social media website. And if you have any other questions, I'll check the chat now that I can stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Anna. I'll just add in Roger asked a good question there. Is it useful to others? Definitely. We did this for youth, but I think anyone trying to get their council to take action on climate, they would find it useful. And we're actually going to do an adaptation of it for new councillors. So once we launch it, we'd be really happy to have your input it's a living resource that we'll keep building out in different ways. So, and thank you for the opportunity to present it here.
Yeah, Judy brings a really good point. This will be a living resource, and right next to where you can download it on our website, there's going to be a quick input form for feedback, but also for other resources that we might have missed. There's an other resources section at the end, and this will hopefully continue to evolve and be fed by many of you.
Thanks so much, Judy and Anna. Really great to learn about this incredible resource. I can't wait to see it, and I have no doubt it will be very helpful to anyone looking to get involved in municipal decision-making for a climate-safe future, not just young people. That being said, I also got my start in local organizing. I think you're right, Anna, that is a place where a lot of us get going. So really amazing to see these resources being developed. So I'm going to ask you one question before we move on to our next speaker. We have had the great fortune, been seeing some really great compliments for Climate Caucus on the chat. A lot of folks on here who've experienced the work of Climate Caucus. And we've been really happy to work with Youth Climate Lab as well as Climate Caucus in recent years. I'm curious if you can give us like a quick, here's some of the mega climate ambition we're seeing from Canadian municipalities. Like a couple of, what's your top 3 climate ambition highlights from Canadian municipalities?
The areas we're seeing a lot of work happening on right now are in buildings, of course, which are the main source of emissions over which municipalities have control. So lots of work in our buildings group, and everyone is welcome to join our working groups, by the way. You can join that. So lots of work in that area, working on retrofits and embodied carbon, passive houses, and so on. A lot of work in zero waste, circular economy. And then I'd say the third one is nature-based solutions, where we have some great partners there, such as Nature Canada and so on, and doing lots of local nature-based climate solutions, which are often a great entry point for smaller and rural municipalities and a good place for climate advocates to push their councils on those. Sometimes they're quite doable. So those are 3 off the top of my head.
Anything to add, Anna?
I think worth noting is the interest in policy interventions from young people when they're domestified. I think, as I mentioned before, a lot of the times policy seems like an overwhelming space, a space that has been reserved for a certain type of person at certain times. And I think once broken down into what it actually means, it is really attractive to young people to be able to participate in decisions that are going to be impacting our future. So yeah, opening it up to any and all policy spaces is quite a priority for us, since we've received a lot of interest from young people and really, really great ideas. I cannot stress that enough, but when you ask questions in a straightforward way, you get some really great policy solutions from people that are experiencing the issues.
Amazing. Thanks so much, both of you. Thanks also for calling in all the way from Oaxaca. And our next speaker is Montana Burgess, really proud Climate Action Network alum and now the executive director of the West Kootenay Eco Society. Montana is going to be telling us about their incredible 100% renewable energy project. Montana.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen here with my presentation. Oops, not share, present. All right. Okay, so my name is Montana Burgess. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I live in the unceded, traditional, and stolen territory of the Sinixt people, also known as the Slocan Valley, my home here in the West Kootenays. And my ancestors all came from Europe. They were all white settlers who settled in the US and Canada. So lots of reckoning there for me. The West Kootenay Eco Society has been around for over 25 years. We're the local environmental group in the area, and I've been the executive director for 5 years. And when I started, it became clear to me that we needed to do a climate campaign in a different way than we've been doing it right in our backyards. So I think a lot of the time, what we're hearing in conversations one-on-one with people on doorsteps, on the phone, in small towns and rural areas, is that they understand that climate change is happening, but they're overwhelmed with the problem and what they can do. So we wanted to create a made in your backyard solutions-based project to combat that overwhelm and get people excited to start taking the steps to then be able to open their mind to more equitable and justice-based work. But our assumption was if they didn't even care enough to take action in a way that could help themselves and the people they love the most, they're probably not going to take action to help anyone else. So our project came off the heels of the Paris climate talks in 2015, where to me it was clear the main success was there was this overwhelming message that was picked up around the world that it's the end of the fossil fuel era and the age of the renewables, which now feels like, well, are we still there 5 years later? Still, is that the message? But it seemed like that was the main thing that was getting traction. And so we jumped on that. The West Kootenays, for those of you who don't know, is in the southeast corner of British Columbia. And it's about, the biggest town is just under 11,000 people. There's 8,000, 7,000 people towns. There's 15 municipalities and 2 regional districts in our area. So it's small town, rural, lots of resource extraction industry based. So pretty typical of a lot of small town Canada and small town US. So why did we frame it around 100% renewable energy? So again, coming out of Paris, that message was landing with people we saw widely. And we did polling more recently last year that backed this, showing that talking to rural and small town British Columbians about climate action or Green New Deal, not only did that not land with them, it kind of sent them running for the hills. Whereas if you talk about renewable energy and clean energy, it opens the door for further conversation. As I mentioned before, it's solutions focused, so it's not fixating on the problem, it's fixating on the solutions to kind of tackle that overwhelm. And then 100% is understandable. It's going all the way. It's not, minus 50% from 2010 levels by 2030. Like, what does that mean? Only policy wonks know what that means. So we need to make something that's communicable to your average person. How we are defining 100% renewable energy for local government in this sense is around heating and cooling for buildings, transportation in communities, electricity, and waste. So it's about reducing pollution waste, phasing out fossil fuels, and transitioning to clean energy and renewable energy. And it's across all community energy use, so including municipal operations, not just corporate. So it all started, as everything always should, with community organizing. I worked for almost 10 years at CAN Canada and CAN International, and really felt that that not seeing the results of your actions, being in those spaces, and being frustrated with that. So now my motto is always do everything from bottom up with communities in order to create that populist base so things actually stick. So we spent 4 years organizing in 9 different local government jurisdictions, so 9 different communities, with using pretty traditional engagement organizing model strategies and tactics. So lots of one-on-one conversations, lots of phone calls, lots of tabling, lots of organizer trainings, presenting to councils, meeting with decision makers. I think we had like in 2018, 2019, we had like 200 different advocacy meetings with local government decision makers throughout our region. We have a picture here of bumper stickers we had made. So the whole slew of tactics and strategies you would use in kind of traditional community organizing to build enough momentum in each community. Our goal was to get 1/3 of residents showing support because that would be the majority of voters. And of course, municipal elections are decided by a very, very small margin of voters to create the support, but also it could create a liability if needed. We had a couple key funders in building our 100% renewable energy plan with the local governments. FCM, we were part of the MSIP project, which just wrapped up. And so that was a huge, huge opportunity to support our local governments that had made commitments to 100% renewable energy to take the next steps and develop a plan. And then the Real Estate Foundation has been a major partner since the beginning. The Foundation of BC has been a major partner since the beginning in supporting the community organizing, but also the policy development pieces for this project. And so all that community organizing resulted in so far 9 local governments committing to transition to 100% renewable energy at the community energy use level no later than 2050. So this is one way to look at them with their logos, but a way I prefer to look at them is like this, with the people involved, because ultimately this comes down to people. And I think that's something we can do a much better job at digging into as the environmental movement, putting people first, showing the human side. These first 3 pictures at the top, the Regional District of Central Kootenay, City of Nelson, Village of Slocan, those were the first 3 that signed on. And you can see like the promo we did then was like these image landscapes, which doesn't tell the story of a town. People coming together really does tell a better story. So we switched our comms in the project to be more focused on the people when I came back from my maternity leave. We then formed a local government working group, and here's some of the smiling faces of local government and staff from these 9 municipalities as they pass motions. And this local government working group met every month or every 2 months over 2 years to direct the plan. So they provided guidance on the directions we should go, and the Eco Society and our staff facilitated the plan development. So we convened the group, we coordinated the group, we did the research and took best practices from other local governments around the world to build a transition plan, a roadmap that worked for our local governments and our communities. Here's another way to look at the working group, because halfway through, of course, COVID hit. So who doesn't love the token screenshot of everyone working together? And kind of a key learning was we had started this working group in 2019, and we got a whole year of working together, coming together every month or 2 in person and building those relationships. If we had started this project during COVID, it would have been a lot harder to establish that trust and get that buy-in. So we just lucked out that we already had that trust and buy-in, so we could continue pushing the project forward in the timelines we had set out and had to have it with our funders to complete it last year. Oops. Next, we did a ton of community engagement in the communities. And of course, again, it all started with in person, and then we had to pivot last year. So we did things like community meetings on before we released the plan to get input on what people wanted for their community future, those visioning exercises. And I think a big piece here in combating the overwhelm is helping people visualize what a renewable energy, what a climate safe future actually looks like in their community so they can get behind it. So often we talk about it out in the ether, these big concepts, which just don't mean anything to people that are busy and working and just trying to pay their bills and get their kids to daycare. So helping ground it in what's going on in their community and envisioning like how they get to work and from work and what their work could even be in 30 years was a really key aspect to getting people to imagine that it's possible and that they want to keep working towards it. We also did things like have, in the lead up to this plan, we had municipal council election debates to kind of bring this conversation in early in the political arena. And we were able to identify people who were interested in doing future community engagement through those processes that then we could reach out to when we were developing the community engagement plan. And then of course, we moved online this year. So once we had a draft plan and it was being rolled out in each community for their comment and input around prioritization in particular, we had a series of webinars, we did surveys, promotion, paid advertising in the local papers, online advertising, the whole works. So here's just a few images to again show you the people behind it. And that led us to our 100% renewable energy plan, the West Kootenay 100% renewable energy plan. So this, again, was developed by 9 local governments, even though there are more in the region because only 9 so far have made this commitment. And it was released in December of last year. And the website's down there for you to go check it out. It's a standalone website. It has no branding of Eco Society on it. This is something that is owned by the local governments, developed by them. We supported it happening. And I will put that link in the chat later. So we really made an effort to frame it again around people, tangible things. So we framed it around health, around safety, and around economic strength. So especially in the introduction section, we shied away from talking about global warming and climate and these like big concepts and tried to really ground it in the impacts that will affect people in their communities in ways they understand. Just to help bring the buy-in for the plan up to the forefront of where people are at currently in their day-to-day lives. And like I said before, it's a community-focused plan. So yes, local governments have jurisdiction over about 50% of their carbon pollution emissions in their communities. But that doesn't mean they can directly affect them all. So we focused in on the community-based pieces, about 25%, which is the buildings, transportation, solid waste, and land used. We didn't focus on the sector-based emissions around oil and gas, industry, and the consumption-based emissions that are very challenging to work on, and we need to figure that out. These are being worked at, of course, in other levels of government and other groups. We know that, and so we're hoping this plan can complement that. And of course, a plan is a snapshot, a moment in time. It has to be revised, and we're hoping that in a couple of years, the local governments will come back together and we'll be in a better place with more capacity and resources to be able to expand the plan to tackle more of those emissions. So we contracted CEA to help with our modeling and some of the policy work, Community Energy Association, who have worked extensively already in the West Kootenays, and framed the renewable energy plan around some of the big moves, which is the model they were already working with. And the big moves tackled transportation, buildings, waste, and energy. In BC, we have this utilities commission that has very archaic rules. It was created like over 100 years ago, the legislation, and really is around centralized power. So it doesn't have a lot of incentive for people to provide decentralized local power. So actually producing more renewable energy is not a priority right now in the plan. We have to conserve energy. We have to get energy more efficient. The renewable energy term is exciting. It's sexy. It brings people in. But the hard, dirty work is actually the less fancy, flashy things of reducing and conserving. That said, when the modeling was done for the region, which we already knew, but we did it specifically for each town, it really showed that transportation was the main thing we needed to look at for priorities. So really here, electrifying passenger vehicles and shifting beyond the car. So making walking, cycling, skateboarding, busing, all those things easier needed to be the priority in order to tackle the main root of those carbon pollution emissions in our communities. Buildings was the second most. I'm not going to go into detail about all the different policy actions. You can check that out on your own. Happy to answer questions another time. But just to note, in terms of looking at this with a equity-based lens, one of the things we're going to be following up and focusing our advocacy around is around shifting beyond the car and not electrifying passenger vehicles. Often it's the most low income, most marginalized, Black, Indigenous, folks of color that are not able to afford electric vehicles and aren't going to be able to anytime soon. And investing more in public transit and active transportation will make it easier for them to get to work, to drop their kids off at daycare, to go to school, which makes our communities healthier, happier, safer, as well as reducing carbon pollution. So that's really where our next steps in advocacy will focus on.
Hey, Montana.
Yeah.
We just need to wrap up so we can hear from Carol.
Totally. I have like 3 more slides. They're short. So there's also supporting actions, which are really focused around advocacy to higher levels of government. And the strength of this collaboration is the local governments now trust each other and can work together and can do that advocacy together to tackle the other emissions areas. So what's next? We're releasing a playbook and toolkit later this month, which will share all of our lessons and materials from all of our organizing, as well as the policy development piece that we've done over the last 4 years to bring us to this point. So we can hopefully support other organizations and communities to do similar work. We're also developing new deep engagement tactics to build support in less progressive communities, because a lot of these communities, there already was a lot of supporters already there. We didn't have to kind of dig deeper. And we're supporting the remaining local governments to adopt the plan and implement it. Already 4 local governments have adopted the plan. And we're going to keep supporting the advocacy for this team of local governments to advocate to other levels of government. And then, of course, never stop organizing. Organize, 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 repeat. So thanks very much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Montana. Wow, what a huge scale of a project. Lots of folks in the chat just amazed at how much you guys have taken on and accomplished. And I know it's a big story to squeeze into a really small amount of time. So thank you for running us through that. Montana, I know you have to leave at the end of the hour. So a reminder to all of us on the webinar that this webinar will go past the hour just so we have time for Q&A, but Montana will be leaving. So there are a few questions in the chat. And if you could answer them in the chat, I would so appreciate it, just because we don't quite have the time to ask them here. And I also just really want to lift up like a couple of the things that you said, because they're so much a part of why we started this webinar series. One, putting people at the heart of climate action and making climate action relevant to people, like so critical. And of course, the way that that happens is locally and regionally, right? It has to speak to people where they live. And then the other thing that I think you really highlighted is it's all about relationship building. And that's how change works. It's like through building relationships between people across different sectors of society and who have different roles to play in the decision-making apparatus. And then finally, on a nerdier note, it's all about energy efficiency first, and then renewables. I really appreciate that one too. So Carol is next on our speakers list. We have 3 more stories to tell you before we sign off today. Carol is the chair of the board of directors for the Front Commun pour une Transition Énergétique. My French is terrible, I'm so sorry. And she'll be telling us about the French Net Zero Communities Project. Carol. You are still muted, and as Carol unmutes, I will remind everyone that interpretation is available to you, so make sure to pick the right language for you in that interpretation section.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'll be speaking English. I found it easier. I hope I don't hurt your ears too much today. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for hearing about this project that we have. It's more high level, so it's a bit more abstract maybe, but I hope it will be interesting. I live on the Huron-Wendat territory, unceded near Quebec City. But the project I'm talking about is really really concerns the whole of Quebec. So here is the presentation. It's quite a dense project, so I'll do my best to not take too much time, but not to rush too much either. So here we go. Sorry. I gave you all my special things you've seen already. So ZEN is zero net emission, zero emission net, and not feeling calm and collected. First, a word on Front commun pour la transition énergétique. It was created in 2015 with NGOs, environmental NGOs, and grassroots ecologist groups. It was really created around resistance to fossil fuel projects, but the name was already transitioned in the name because we felt that's where we had to go, but the motive was that. Over the years, the following years, the membership widened to include labor unions and community organizations, a lot of them, and a student organization. The mission widened also to include climate justice and the energy transition as such, and that started with establishing criteria for an energy transition promoting social justice. That was quite a long process, a very collaborative process. And then in 2019, we started the project I'll be talking about today, the Quebec ZAN project. Okay, just to give you an idea of the membership, you have some of the logos here. We'll go through that. You probably know some of them. Here are all the unions and different groups. 90 organizations today, 1.8 million represented by those organizations, diverse horizons, those 5 movements. Maybe important to note that we're huge, but we're very young. We're huge because people want to do the transition, but we're still structuring that movement. And what unites us, of course, is that we want a fair and immediate transition. Why the Quebec ZAN project? Well, it started with an observation that we all made here today. We know what needs to be done. We know it has to be done. Why don't we do it? So another try at an answer to this big question. We felt that that there are 3 unmet needs that explain this apathy. A clear vision of the destination. Who wants to jump off a cliff? We tell people we have to get rid of oil and gas. How do we do that? How do we do it in a way that is inclusive and fair for everyone? So those are 2 huge questions. And well, the coyote is okay with jumping off the cliff apparently, but most people are not. The father of the paradigm shift theory is that we don't discard a paradigm when it is proven wrong, but rather when it is replaced by a new one. So the vision is very important. That was at the basis of the project, that we really felt that having a vision of a foreseeable future was really what got people involved in that project, why they went along with it. So second need, unmet, consistent information on the ways to get to the destination. You know all about this information, and people don't know who they can believe anymore for very good reasons. And the third thing that we noticed was that we need to be taking responsibility at all levels, and it's not always the case. People seem to be throwing balls at each other. Is it the government who's the bad guy? Is it the consumer? Is it the companies, the investors? What is the role of the municipalities? And nobody wants to be the only one to change, because this change is not easy. So that's another unmet need. So how do we overcome that? The answer that we work around now is based on the fact that it doesn't seem to be coming from the top for the moment. So we are trying to co-build a social movement from the base, same as the people who talked before me, who had very interesting presentations. And the basis is social dialogue. I think it's important to note that we don't oppose that to advocacy. It's 2 different things that both need to be done. Advocacy wants to apply direct pressure on policymakers, Quebec Zen and other projects like that want to transform the social norm by from the base. So the objectives of the Quebec Zen project are to increase the likelihood that Quebec transition to net zero emission will occur in a timely manner and in a spirit of social justice. The first part is having a common vision of where we're going and how to get there. Is a co-construction of a roadmap for the transition. The second block is really the subject, the main subject today. It's Zen communities. The idea being to support proliferation and multiplication of structured processes towards zero net emission at all levels. We have a calendar. You can see just rapidly. The blue is the roadmap. Sorry, it's Franglish. The slides are part in English, part in French. And the green is the community Zen project, which is the action part. There can be other actions, but right now we're working on the Zen community project. So first part, the roadmap, just to give you an overview, it did not aim to describe what's possible. That's not the idea, but what was necessary. So that's the first thing to know. It aims to combine the consensus from scientists and specialists with the Front Commun's criteria for social justice. It aims to cover all aspects of the transformation. So it's not only technical, it's not only political, it's not only governance. We try to look at the lateral issues, the vertical issues, everything. For each subject, there are 14 subjects. We propose a vision, beacons to guide the way, alerts to dead ends and distractions, and actions at all levels. So, the result of that was great, really. It ended in last October. We published not the final, but the finished version, I would say, of the roadmap. There was a very wide participation, 80 organizations, 190 individuals from the Front Commun, but from outside too, a lot of university professors, some First People perspective. Unfortunately, that was a challenge, but we did include some of it, and we're trying to improve on that front. And it was very rich. We had really extensive exchanges confronting specialized knowledge and a wide array of perspectives. So that brought a lot. People took that exercise very seriously. They were very great conversation. A lot of barriers were broken between movements, between disciplines, and the Front Commun group with 25 new members. It brought really people up to all at the same level, we say level playing field, thinking of the transition, having a systematic view of the transition, interdependence of all aspects, actors, deep understanding of the economies behind the crisis, a global view of issues, which makes the transition a societal project and not a technical or economic project. So that brings us to the second block, which is the Zen community. When we see the transition as a social project, well, people can tackle it, right? So since January of last year, we started thinking about it. It was not obvious. There was a lot of thinking before we went into action. This project is a unifying, structuring project. It wants to tap into the direction set out in the roadmap to support the construction of the communities that are net zeros, more resilient, more inclusive, and we want to do that using a distributed engagement model. Okay, so the pilot project that we're in now aims to have 12 Zen communities within 3 years. It started, of course, it's not, it's an ongoing process after that. Some definitions very shortly. A community is territorial in that project. It could be something else, but now it's territorial, but it's any territory. It can be a neighborhood, it can be a borough, it can be a city, it can be an administrative region as a whole, depending on what people want. And a Zen community, of course, is a community that is in the process of a fair transition towards net zero. Territorial bearer is a group that raises its hands and says, we'll tackle this challenge, we'll try and do this in our area. A territorial transition task force. I'm not sure if the term is so great, but the idea is that we don't just want a carrier, we want people, the bearer that will not be, how would I say, will not be advocating with everyone. On the contrary, he will be uniting everyone in a transition task force. That's the concept, okay? I'll come back to that. I won't go through that, don't worry. The logic model, I just wanted to show you, it's not that great. That was an imposed format, but I just wanted to show you that there are 4 axes in the logic model. One is the national level, one is the territorial level, one is inclusion, and one is awareness and multiplier effect. So we want to create a process that will be usable again. The ultimate goal is a scale change in climate action and consequent reduction in GHG emissions by making visible, by nurturing, by helping to structure a social movement that will carry a just transition to net zero emissions community. The national level, we're in French here, sorry. The main objective here at the national level is to link national, when we say national, it's Quebec, right? Sorry, sorry if that hurts your feeling. Quebec-wide actors from the Front Commun, but also from outside, because we have allies outside of the Front Commun, and territorial actors who go ahead, put them together to jumpstart everything, to link the knowledge and the know-how and everything that has to be done to shorten the circuit so that the transition can be deployed as efficiently as possible and deeply. The territorial level, of course, the aim is to have a shift towards net zero and a society that is more resilient at all levels, environmental, social, and economic. Social meaning in part inclusive, that's part of that, of course. And there are a lot of activities related to all those objectives. Inclusion is that we want to be sure that vulnerable populations, notably First People, are part of the collective processes that started. That's good. That's happening now. And the fourth axis, as I said, is awareness and the multiplier effect, because we don't want just here and there. We hope to contaminate as many communities as possible, so that that depends on great communication and also on having, on documenting what we're doing and being able to reproduce it. At the summer of 2020, we made a grant application, and it was in July. It was hot. It was the holidays, and it was a COVID. But for that grant application, we solicited support letters, and 80 people answered. Sorry about the numbers, but I think it shows how people are, we say en soif, are thirsty for a leadership and a structure. It's not a leadership from top down, right? We just try to put people together, but people really want a structured effort. So to us, that's what we read in those results. 80 letters, $1 million commitments, partnerships, a lot within the Front Commun, of course, but also external. With university professors, and immediately 8 territorial bearers, I'm not sure if it's the best term, came forward and said, yes, we'll do it. And they themselves were able to attract local partners. So in case...
We're gonna have to wrap up quickly.
Okay, so, well, I'll just go through these because just in case some people know them, I wanted to show them. These are our first or year one. I'll skip the strategies. Sorry. It says mainly that we want to, our effort is on capacity development and co-development, right? This is a brief survey that we, in-house survey that we made of our bearers, so they're quite excited about it. This is the journey, the typical journey of a community. The next steps: financing the projects, building the structures. This is a draft, quite advanced, but a draft still. Building the steering committee, we're still recruiting. Building the team, some of you know Super Melanie, we're hiring a lot, not a lot, but some other resources right now. There will be a presentation, maybe you will have more time if you're interested, at the World Social Forum on January 29 at 4 p.m. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Carol. Really appreciate it. Again, so many people in the chat really amazed by the scale of the work and the philosophy behind that work. So that's something that I really wanted to lift up from your presentation is, you know, part of what we're trying to impart with this webinar series is like a lot of this thinking is being done, has been done, and are, you know, there are tools that exist that we can all use. And so I think a lot of the thinking that the front has done on distributed engagement across communities is just so valuable and has made such an incredible impact. So thank you so much for that. I think there are a couple of questions for you in the chat. So if I could direct you toward the chat to answer those, that would be awesome, because we're going to quickly move on to our next video presentation from a incredible community project that is happening in Comeau. So Will Cole Hamilton is a municipal councillor for the city of Courtenay and a member of the Climate Caucus. So we're going to show you a quick video that tells the story of collaboration between the city of Courtenay, Comeau First Nation, and Project Watershed. There'll be an introduction by Will, and then we'll have a short video that details the project. And I'll let Lauren take over the screen to give you guys that video. And then we will finish off our webinar today with a great story from Yule. So please stick around for that.
Hi there, my name is Will Cole Hamilton. I'm a city councillor in the city of Courtenay on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and also a member and director of Climate Caucus. And I'm speaking to you today from the traditional ancestral unceded lands of the Comox First Nation. I want to tell you a story about placemaking, but it's also really about resilience and reconciliation and the ability to renew a damaged ecosystem. And this story is about the place that I live in. The city of Courtenay is on a
Hi, folks. Technical difficulties. I'm so sorry. I think maybe what we'll do while I try to get that sorted out is I'm going to show you the second video Will sent us over to. That was his intro. And now I'm going to show you the video about the project itself. And then if I can, I'll go back and show you Will's introduction. Yeah, apologies for that. Hold tight.
We haven't always been the best stewards of our environment, and I think doing a project like this will reinforce the need for that stewardship, the value of these natural environments, and the importance of communities working together to protect their estuaries.
I'm from the Kwakwaka'wakw, Nuchanos, and Comox. And in Comox, we're from the Aitsin, which means people from the sun. And Wedlet is my traditional name. Means no matter how much wealth you have and give away, there's never an end. Why is Huhusam important to me? Because it really illustrates how long our people have been around and how they've been in relationship with the land. Huhusam translates that it's really slippery. It's on the beach, right? Husam means slippery, and when you add the Husam, it means it's really slippery. And so it's translated today as Kuskusam. But the proper way is Husam or Huhusam.
One of the 3 partners in this project, along with Project Watershed, is the Comox First Nation. This is part of their unceded traditional territory that we're looking to restore back to its pre-settlement state. And so this is also not just a story about salmon and people coming together for a healthier vision of the future. It's also a story about learning to do government-to-government relations and how to make reconciliation in action.
Kuskusam is so important to me because when I think about the site, I think about the critical habitat nature of the site and where it's located in the heart of the salmon migration corridor. And the fact that all the salmon stocks that are returning to spawn as adults in the Solemn River watershed or in the Puntledge River watershed have to migrate past that site.
I've lived in this community since 1979, and of course, the sawmill was a major employer here throughout most of that era.
When I first moved to the Comox Valley, it was still in operation. And so it was going all the time. You know, you could hear the clanging and the banging and the movement of logs, and people never thought much of it. There was a lot of Comox band members employed, and so they were active in it. But it was a contradiction.
So the great thing that we're now doing is raising awareness so that we can get the money that we need to pull out almost 4 hectares of pavement. In some cases, that's over a foot thick with rebar coming through it.
We want to take this community eyesore and turn it into a community ecological asset. And I think about, you know, what the site must have looked like before it was developed, and it's really important to me to see that we're able to restore the site back to a natural functioning condition, because then it's going to be able to support fish and wildlife, it's going to be a community asset, it's going to support recreational opportunities, and we also have an opportunity with the restoration design to build in some flood attenuation capacity into the site as well.
So once the wall is taken down and the landscape is restored, there'll be a natural movement of water from the river when it overflows onto that part of the floodplain.
What happens is that the river flow changes. It comes down quite heavily from the Puntledge and the Solemn River into the Courtenay River, and then pushes against this iron corrugated back wall to then come directly across the river to start erosion on the high bank side of the river.
Looking forward at climate change and sea level rise, this is really a very important area to make these sorts of changes to let nature look after us and look after itself.
You can see what the damage that's being done with the corrugated iron backing that's vertical to the water, because in salmon running time the seals will herd the salmon against the backwater, and it's not a fair fight. They can certainly eat a lot of salmon very quickly and get very fat and sleek.
Okay, so there's a real possibility that if we're not successful in this venture, we'll permanently lose this property to development, and it is critically located in the heart of the salmon migration corridor. So we're not going to be doing those stocks any service by not capitalizing on this opportunity.
Removing all of that is the #1 thing we can do to try and turn around the health of our Comox estuary and bring back salmon. The Courtenay River opens up into the Comox estuary, and that Comox estuary is part of Baines Sound, and that's the body of water that kind of sits at the end of our whole Comox Valley watershed. Now, Baines Sound itself is one of the most beautiful, valuable, and highly productive bodies of water in the Salish Sea. It's also the second most important estuary in all of British Columbia by a number of measures, including the presence of herring, the presence of internationally significant numbers of migratory birds. And so Baines Sound and the Comox estuary are incredible jewels to our community.
Estuary is a word that comes from estrogen, and estrogen means fertility. And so when you live on an estuary, you're living in one of the most very fertile places of the earth. Everybody's seen those maps of the earth at night with lit up by electric lights, right? Spots of illumination, and you see how they're clustered. Well, an estuary is like that in that there are nodes of life on the planet. In other words, the variety of life and the biodiversity is greater in some areas, and the greatest is along estuaries.
If I can look back in 15 years and see a beautiful riverside forest and know that I helped play a role in making that possible, I think that's a gift, and I would like other people to share in that feeling. So I think that's why we should all get behind Kuskusum and support Project Watershed to make this a reality for the Comox Valley.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Sorry about those technical difficulties.
All good. I just wanted to plug, if folks are interested in learning more about the project and want to support it, you can check out Watershed, projectwatershed.com. Oh, what am I doing? There. They can check out projectwatershed.com. They can contribute to the project and learn more about it there. I'll make sure to drop the link in the chat.
Awesome, thanks so much. And as we're plugging the event that Carol mentioned at the World Forum, is the details on that, the World Social Forum, sorry, the details on that are also being described in the chat by Katerina. Thanks so much for sharing. And also apologies to those on the West Coast for my making the X in Comox silent. It's Comox, not Como, I'm sorry. So we are finally heading to our last but certainly not least speaker, Yul, whose work I've been familiar with for ages since I started working in Nova Scotia, has joined us. So good to have you, Yul. And Yul's the Director of Sustainability Solutions Group, and he's going to talk to us about low carbon communities and municipal planning. And Yul, before you kick us off, I'm just going to remind everyone, because this is the last speaker for our webinar, that you can find the schedule for our whole webinar series at climateactionnetwork.ca/pathways to zero. You can register for all of those webinars on that website. The link is available there. It's also been placed in the chat. Recordings will be available there as well. And our next webinar is a week from today, so next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, registration link is in the chat or on our website at climateactionnetwork.ca/pathways to zero. Thanks, and over to you, Yul.
Thank you. Screen showing up?
Yeah.
Perfect. So my name's Yul Herbert. I'm coming to you from Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq peoples. Super interesting presentations. I've been following the West Kootenay story, and it was really neat to hear how it actually happened. So that was fascinating, and also Climate Caucus and others. So very pleased to be here and part of this group. I've been working with municipalities and communities for more than 15 years on climate action plans. I work through a workers cooperative, which is called Sustainability Solutions Group, and we are essentially a consultancy, but we're very much a mission-oriented organization, and that really is intrinsic to all of our work. We look at climate change as a wicked problem, and I'm using wicked in a technical sense rather than mean or ugly, although mean or ugly might also apply. And so in the literature, wicked is defined as a problem in which the actual formulation of the problem is a problem. So it's actually really hard to describe climate change in all of its dimensions. It's also a symptom of other problems. And once you start to try and quantify it, which is really one of the key pieces that we undertake, that becomes very apparent. It's also very highly resistant to solutions, and that's why it's so momentous to actually solve it. And it's also very interconnected with all sorts of other problems around equity and inequality and so forth. And then the last one, I think, is that the knowledge around climate is contested, and we confront that in almost all of our projects. So our work is very focused on community, on neighborhoods, on villages, towns, cities, and regions, and we work at all of those scales. We've been able to work in many locations in Canada with many communities over the past 15 or so years. This is just a sample. Banff, Sudbury, Toronto, Bridgewater, Guelph, Edmonton, Burlington, Peel, Edmonton again, National Capital Region, Halifax, Caledon, Peel, Thunder Bay, and Western Region, Nova Scotia, and there's a lot more. But each one of these really is a very detailed roadmap for that particular community on how to decarbonize all aspects of the community. So whatever's happening in that geographic boundary, that is our focus, and how to decarbonize that entire geography. And it's both a technical exercise, it's an engagement exercise, and it's a capacity building exercise. And in each case, we really try and capture the spirit of the place. And that means there's a lot of discussions and focus groups and meetings, and also very detailed technical analysis that tries to capture the dynamics of a particular community. And each community in Canada is very different. There's very different economies. For example, working in Hamilton right now, and the steel industry more than dominates the emissions in Hamilton. There are also very different geographies. So we see, some communities like Ottawa, which have a very big geographic footprint, and very rural areas, as well as the very dense downtown. As well, there's interesting spatial configurations of communities. You see the communities in Nova Scotia, which were built prior to the car, and then you see BC communities, which are much more spread out because they've developed post-car. So all of those factors really contribute to the unique characteristics of each community, and I think make the argument that there's no one size fits all. Each community has its own story and own narrative, and own energy around climate. In fact, the cultural differences across Canada with respect to climate action are also really fascinating. Part of our role is to actually quantify and translate and identify the specific actions and make that roadmap from where we are now to the future very, very transparent. We want to know how many dwellings we need to retrofit year over year and how much that's going to cost. We want to know how many electric vehicles are needed, how many people we can shift out of cars based on the land use planning projections. And so we spend a lot of time quantifying all of that and making that real for the planners and policymakers and councillors and community members so that they can actually see the trajectory from zero, or from where they're at to zero emissions, and then understand the financial implications of that. And I think in the last little while, that's been the really big focus, is understanding how significant an investment this is, but also the all of the benefits associated with that, with those investments. Climate action planning in municipalities has really, I say, gone through 3 generations. Sort of post-Kyoto era, there was a lot of voluntary leadership, which was the Partners for Climate Protection program with FCM and the Compact of Mayors and others. And it was really people were learning about the role of municipalities in climate action. The second generation was a bit more serious. It was the emergence of climate action plans, the growth in sustainability departments and climate departments in municipalities. Usually there's one person with, say, a $200,000 budget. And so it was a relatively small priority within municipalities, but it was present. The third generation is now, and I think now municipalities are actually getting very serious. The climate emergency declarations was put climate as a top priority for most municipalities that we're working with. And that means that there's beginning to be much more significant budgets. There's beginning to be much more whole organization approaches to climate rather than just one small department and one person. We've seen the emergence of climate accounting frameworks and carbon budgets in a number of Canadian municipalities, which I think is quite transformative in terms of the worldview with which we're approaching climate. So that's the generation that we're in, and I think a lot of the people's prior presentations have really supported. Those are the voices that have made this third generation emerge, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how creative municipalities can get with implementing it. I argue that there is no effective response to climate change that does not involve local government. And I think this is why the federal government has really supported local government climate action through FCM and through other measures like the LC3 project, because a lot of the levers still exist within local governments that can address climate action, and they can address the local context specifically. Just to highlight that, the most powerful mechanism that most municipalities have is land use planning. And land use planning locks in patterns of a lot of emissions or patterns of very little emissions. And this is a comparison of two cities of which you're all familiar, Atlanta versus Barcelona. Same population in each, amount or more or less 2.5, 2.8 million. One spreads out over 4,200 square kilometers, the other is confined to 160 square kilometers. The emissions impact of that is 1/10. So Barcelona's greenhouse gas emissions per capita are 1/10 that of Atlanta. That's one part of the story. The second part of the story is it's relatively easy to decarbonize Barcelona. District energy makes sense. Transit makes sense from a cost-effective perspective. Putting transit into Atlanta is extremely hard. So land use planning is a key lever, but it's long-term and it really contributes to locking in or locking out emissions reductions. And that's an important role that cities play. The other piece of that is, I'm not sure, maybe this is a rhetorical question, but I'm not sure how many people would rather live in Atlanta than Barcelona or vice versa. Not to say that Atlanta is a bad place to live, but Barcelona obviously has a lot of compelling elements that are a result of the built form of that city. And communities are tackling climate change, really find that it helps with all sorts of other aspirations. And we heard this from the Kootenays as well. The story of health is a key part. If you eliminate combustion of fossil fuels in your community, you're essentially eliminating most air pollution. There's still some that comes from tires on pavement and other sources, but most of that disappears. And with that goes high rates of asthma and many other nasty chronic diseases that are really growing in presence within communities. People walk and cycle more, and there's all sorts of interesting social, well, the technical term, I guess, is social capital benefits that can emerge as well. So these are all sort of what we call co-benefits or ancillary benefits of climate, and sometimes they actually lead in climate action plans depending on the culture of the local context. Montana also talked about economic development, and we've done climate action plans that are actually called economic development plans. So it's basically a climate action plan under the guise of an economic development plan. And climate action plans are really about stimulating jobs, about communities taking control of their employment future, because energy is an untapped resource for most communities, and you can take that resource and mine it and turn it into employment activities. You can also use climate action to stimulate innovation. There's all sorts of interesting new job employment or businesses emerging and creative ways to solve problems, not only traditional businesses, but also social businesses and cooperatives. The energy cooperative movement is a really great example of that. And then finally, the community's reputation is enhanced. And this is a bit of a sales job, but Vancouver's brand is really all about its greenness. And that's really worked for Bridgewater, for example, in Nova Scotia. They've managed, because of their investments in energy planning and energy transition, to attract a lot of people to that community, and it's become much more dynamic because of those efforts. So climate action planning is really whole city planning. And I think once you start trying to model it, it becomes obvious. You can't not look at the wastewater system. You can't not look at the transportation system. You can't not look at the social implications of the investments in the transition. There's no substitute for local information, local capacity, and local strategies and solutions. And I just leave, this is the last slide. It really tries to highlight how creative and dynamic communities are. And we've seen analysis that says local communities are responsible for 50 or have levers to influence 50 or 60% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the community. We always start our projects with looking at 100% of the emissions, because I have seen in pretty much every community or many different communities, strategies that address emissions that are considered outside of their purview in every case. So Hamilton, for example, is partnering with the steel industry. Steel industry you would consider federally regulated, but there is an interesting initiative to explore the use of waste heat from steel industry in Hamilton, which is a sector of emissions that most people would consider beyond the municipal purview. And we see that across the board. There's so many fascinating ways that municipalities are turning emissions into their responsibility and taking control of that when others are not willing to. Other levels of government are not willing to. I think the most fascinating initiative that I've seen in the last little while by municipalities is really the adoption of carbon budgets. And this is the effort by municipalities to align their targets and their efforts with 1.5 degrees, and recognizing that it's actually the global carbon budget is cumulative and not an annual target. And so they're setting Edmonton included within its new city plan a carbon budget of 135 megatons, and that's a cumulative carbon budget. So if it uses up more in the next few years, it will have less in the subsequent years. And that's really a whole different lens to look at how you manage carbon. And now they're in the process of adopting a carbon management or a carbon accounting framework, which allows them to track the GHG impacts of all their decisions and also to align their decisions with their carbon budget. So this whole sophisticated approach to managing carbon is just emerging out of the ecosystem of very creative city staff and community members. So that's, I think the last part is that there's really no limit to what a community can do on climate action, and we see that across the board. And for communities to not allow anyone to put limits on what they can do. So I think that is where I will leave it.
Thank you so much, Yul. Really interesting to hear you end off talking about carbon budgets, because of course, we at Climate Action Network Canada have spent a lot of the last few years advocating for Canadian climate accountability, and we did get the Net Zero Accountability Act in Bill C-12 at the very end of 2020, but it did not use the carbon budgeting approach, which is what we were hoping for and recommending. And yeah, something so valuable about that approach is that it makes these decisions, like it gives you the framework in which you can be making decisions and prioritizing projects within your community so that you're actually taking your climate priorities into account. So really appreciate that, and also so valuable just to hear you move through the mechanics of working with municipalities and why it is that municipalities are really leading on climate ambition in so many parts of the world, including in Canada. And Indigenous communities, of course, as we know, have been leading on that front for a long time. But yeah, so thanks so much, Yul. I'm going to wrap us up because we are 1 minute away from 2:30 Eastern. So we are at the end of our time together. Yul, there are a couple of questions for you in the chat. So if you could take a quick look and answer them in the last minute, that'd be awesome. I just want to thank all of you so much for being here. We were together for 90 minutes and many of you stuck around for that whole time. A reminder that our next webinar is on systems change. It will be an hour long, so we're moving back to 60 minutes. We just had a lot to pack into this first conversation. And that will be next Thursday, January 28th at 1 p.m. You can register at climateactionnetwork.ca/pathways to zero. Thank you all again so much for being here. Thank you so much to our presenters, Yul, Will, Judy, Anna, Carol. Really amazing to hear about all the incredible work that you're doing. And we'll see you all next week for a talk about system change. Have a great afternoon, everybody, or rest of your day, wherever you may be. And we'll be talking to you soon.